Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Some Stops Along the Way, your podcast that focuses on some of the most interesting countries in the world through the lens of my work there, but also looking at their history, their politics, their geopolitics, rather, and their culture. We are deep now into a an area of discussion called Islam's fault line. We've all already navigated some very interesting countries in the Islamic world in both North Africa and the Middle East. Earlier, we picked some up in Asia as well, like Indonesia, Bangladesh, etc. But today, we are jumping into a country that really defies, in some ways, understanding. And we're going to do that in just a moment. But first, I want to remind you that my memoir, Some Stops Along the Way, which is a companion to this podcast, is available on Amazon. Love it if you would grab a copy of that. You will read about some very interesting people, some amazing experiences that I've had around the world, and also gain insight into some supremely interesting countries. That's Some Stops Along the Way, available on Amazon. Today, let's jump right in to a country that I usually don't make lists. I'm asked all the time, what's your list of the best countries that you've ever worked or the worst countries? And I usually don't go down that road because it's too subjective. But I will tell you, there are probably three countries in the world where I felt a degree of hopelessness that I've never felt anywhere else. One of them was Bosnia and Herzegovina. The other one uh, was Iraq, and the third is Yemen. Um, and these countries are very different, and I'm not saying at all that Bosnia and Herzegovina and Iraq are failed states. They're not. My hopelessness there was for different reasons, and we've already discussed those in previous episodes. Yemen, however, is truly a failed state. Very much like Central African Republic, which we'll do an episode on later when we get to Sub-Saharan Africa. There have been just a few places in the world that I could say, as an economic growth expert, that I wouldn't even know how to begin to try to address the issues that they have. And Yemen is one of those countries. Yemen has a huge amount of possibilities. In some ways, it's a very beautiful country. I met some very interesting and engaging people there. But its governance is so broken that you wonder how they can pull this thing together. But you get a lot of things when you go to Yemen that you'll never forget. And one of the things that virtually no one would ever forget the first time they go there is the Yemeni wind. You see, that wind comes from the highlands like a living thing. It's cool, thin, carrying the scent of dust and stone and something older than memory. You can be standing in the middle of a crowded street in the capital Sana'a, horns blaring, vendors calling out over crates of fruit, the whole city moving in kind of a beautiful chaos. And then the wind brushes past you, and suddenly you're aware that this place has been here far longer than any of us. You see, Yemen has been here longer than the nations on the map, longer than the borders drawn by empires, longer than the wars that tried to define it. Yemen is ancient in a way that really humbled me. Tower houses rising like carved mountains, terrace farms clinging to cliffs, a city skyline built from mud and sunlight. And yet, for most of the world, Yemen is known only through the headlines: conflict, famine, crisis, a place spoken of in the language of tragedy. But that's not the whole story. And it's not even the beginning of the story. Because before the war, before the politics, before the world turned its gaze toward this corner of the Arabian Peninsula. Yemen was something else entirely. It was a crossroads of civilizations, a kingdom of incense and trade, a land the Romans once called Arabia Felix, fortunate Arabia. And if you listen closely, past the noise, past the headlines, you can still hear the echoes of that older Yemen. You can hear it in the poetry recited in mountain villages, in the laughter spilling out of cot rooms in the afternoon, and in the call to prayer drifting over Sana'a at dawn. And you already know that I'm quite attached to the beauty of the cadence of the call of prayer. Even though I'm a Christian, not a Muslim, just hearing that sound brings back so many memories to me of years working in that region. And Sana'a was certainly a place where you can hear it every day. You see, Yemen is a place where beauty and suffering live side by side, where the past is never far away, where the future is still being fought for. So today we're going to walk through that story. Not the story of war, but the story of a people, of a land, of a culture that refuses to disappear. So take a breath, feel that wind from the mountains, and let's get started. Yemen is a land of contradictions. It's a place, as I said before, that the Romans called Arabia Felix, which means fortunate Arabia, because of its fertility, its wealth, and yet today it's mostly known for conflict, hunger, and geopolitical struggle. When you stand on a rooftop in Sana'a at dawn, as I have, you'll see a sight unlike any other in the Arab world. Mud brick tower houses rising like ancient fortresses, white gypsum catching the first light. And as I said, that call to prayer echoing through a city that's been inhabited for more than 2,500 years. Yemen is at a crossroads between Africa and Arabia, between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, between ancient incense routes and modern shipping lanes. And it is this geography, this strategic position, that has shaped both its greatness and its suffering. Let's look at the kingdoms of this quote unquote Arabia Felix, fortunate Arabia. Yemen's geography is among the most diverse in the region. Rugged highlands, terrace farms, vast deserts, and long coastlines along the Red Sea and Arabian Sea. This diversity made Yemen both self-sufficient and deeply connected to global trade. Ancient Yemen was the home to powerful kingdoms like Saba, Qataban, Hadramawt, and Himyar that controlled the incense and spice trade links linking India, Africa, and the Mediterranean. Frankincense and myrrh flowed northward. Wealth and influence flowed south. The legendary Marib Dam symbolized Yemen's prosperity and ingenuity, supporting agriculture and sustaining the Sabian kingdom for centuries. Because of its fertility and commercial success, classic writers, as I said earlier in the episode, called Yemen Arabia Felix, distinguishing it from the harsher deserts to the north. Yemen, of course, is closely linked with Islam. But like everywhere else, Islam came to Yemen in phases. Yemen embraced Islam peacefully during the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, becoming a center of scholarship and trade in the early Islamic world. Cities like Sana'a and Zabid became renowned for Islamic architecture, education, and urban culture. Their mud brick tower houses and white gypsum decorations remain iconic to this day. And guess what? For those of us that love coffee, Yemen is a great place because it was the birthplace of the global coffee trade. The port of Mocha became synonymous with the high quality beans exported across the world. Now, the Ethiopians would argue with you from now on about where coffee originated, but there is adequate proof that the global coffee trade, at least, started in Yemen. So, as with other countries in the region, the metamorphosis of Yemen from Arabia Felix took place in many different ways. In the modern era rather, Yemen was divided. North Yemen was under Ottoman influence. South Yemen centered around the British controlled port of Aden. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, North Yemen became an independent kingdom, while South Yemen evolved into a British protectorate and later a Marxist state. North and South Yemen were unified, however, in 1990, forming the modern Republic of Yemen. But unity was fragile. Tensions erupted into civil war in 1994 when Southern leaders attempted to secede. And we'll come back to that in just a few moments. As with many other countries in the region, Yemen is a tribal society. It's deeply shaped by tribal affiliations, local customs, and strong community bonds. Hospitality is central to Yemeni life. I can tell you this firsthand. They're very hospitable people. They don't have much, most of them, but they love to share meals, coffee, and cot chewing gatherings from the backbone of social interaction. And by the way, for those of you that don't know what cot is, that's QAT. Cot is a root that is chewed by the Yemenis. It gives somewhat of a high. I won't say that it is akin to marijuana, but certainly it can be akin to some forms of cannabis. But they chew it as a matter of their culture, and it does provide, let's say, a little pick me up during the day. But when you look at Yemen, as I said before, a lot of times it's easy to focus on the fact that it is the modern version of a failed state. But what people don't understand is that because of its ancient culture, Yemen has one of the oldest continuous poetic traditions in Arabia. Music, often accompanied by the oud, that's O-U-D, it's an instrument, preserves stories of love, homeland, and wisdom. It also has beautiful architecture, especially in Sana'a. There are masterpieces of mud brick engineering and artistic design. But so much of this has been overshadowed by geopolitics. You see, Yemen sits at the southern entrance of the Red Sea, overlooking the Bab el Mandab Strait, one of the world's most strategic maritime checkpoints. This location has shaped its history and its conflicts. Yemen's current conflict is multifaceted. First, you have the Houthi rebels, who are backed by Iran, internationally recognized government backed by Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which is pursuing influence in the south. And the US, China, and Russia all have strategic interest in Yemen, from shipping lanes to regional influence. China sees Yemen as part of the Silk Road initiative, while Russia sees influence across the Red Sea corridor. But shipping out of, which has been traditionally a huge source of income for Yemen, has been very challenging of late. Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea have drawn international military responses, raising a risk of a broader conflict. It's just not an easy situation. And a lot of this really ties back to the period that Yemen fell apart, that it descended into war. The traces of this modern conflict go all the way back to 2004, when fighting erupted between Houthis and the Yemeni government in the northern Sada region. By 2014, the Houthis had seized Sana'a, the capital, triggering a regional intervention and a devastating civil war. And that civil war really tore apart the entire fabric of the country. Yemen faces one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world: widespread hunger, displacement, and economic collapse. Recent developments include prisoner exchanges and attempts at negotiation, but the conflict remains unresolved. It's a desperately poor, almost ungovernable place. And it's a shame because its ancient traditions and culture are so fantastic, from the food to the music to the poetry. I used to just relish in listening to the stories of Yemen before the conflict, before things fell apart. And that's really what a lot of the locals say. They almost gauge their lives by the before and after, before things fell apart and after things fell apart. Don't get me wrong, Yemen was never easy. It was never a country that had the kind of vision of the UAE or the kind of strategy of Saudi Arabia or the kind of resources of Qatar. But it was a proud nation, a nation steeped in history, where the people wanted to live good and decent lives. And yet this was all torn away from them. Yemen today is effectively divided among competing authorities: the Houthis in the north, the internationally recognized government, southern separatists, and various local militias. But despite the war, Yemeni culture endures. Its poetry, its music, its architecture, its hospitality, they remain sources of identity and resilience. Any lasting peace, however, must balance the interests of local tribes, regional powers, and global actors, a complex equation shaped by geography, history, and identity. You see, the challenge is that there are a lot of cooks in Yemen's kitchen, a lot of them. And all those cooks want a taste of what they desire. Whether it's the separatists, whether it's the militias, the government, the international community, this is all a toxic cocktail of things that can and will go wrong. And Yemen is certainly a place where an extraordinary number of things have gone wrong. Walking the streets of Sana'a is surreal because you see all this interesting architecture and you meet some amazing people. You shop at the fruit stands, you buy your meat at the fish market. You find a way, as we did in Kabul, as we did in Freetown, Sierra Leone, as we did in Bangui, Central African Republic, and so many other places. You find a way to survive. And by survive, I don't mean physical survival. I mean mental survival. You see, the people that live there have adapted to this chaos. And yet, you've heard me say before that stability is the greatest resource a country has. When a country devolves into chaos, as Yemen did, and continues to spiral in, nothing good is going to come of that. This is where Islamic extremists and other malign actors can gain a foothold, whether that's internally or externally. And yet, people have to survive. And so they learn how to navigate this chaos, this system that is in many ways so taciturn. And as an expatriate, when you live there, you learn to do the same. Now, none of us who were foreigners who lived or worked in Sana'a, and I did short-term projects there. I did not live long-term in Yemen. Those of us who did that were living really in kind of a parallel universe, in a bubble, so to speak. Yes, we would go out into Sana'a and other areas of Yemen, and we would interact with the locals, and we would experience some of what they were going through. But there's no way that you could understand the type of complexity in Yemen without really being from there. Even if you were an expat living there, you tended to live in a bubble, in a very nice guest house or a hotel where you had people taking care of you. Your challenges were somewhat muted by the fact that people either worked for you or you knew people that could take care of whatever situation arose. Can you imagine just being an average person in Yemen, especially if you didn't have money, trying to understand how to navigate this chaos? I think a lot about this term Arabia Felix, fortunate Arabia. I don't think very many people in Yemen today would consider themselves to be fortunate. Certainly the ingredients were there. They had the coastline, they had the mountains, they had the desert, they had a society that was steeped in history and culture. But when things fall apart, they fall apart quickly. I remember something that a friend of mine in the Czech Republic told me years ago. If you watch my episode on the Czech Republic, I think I said that in this episode, although it's been many episodes ago, so maybe I did or maybe I didn't. I can't really remember now. But the former president, the first president after the fall of communism in the Czech Republic, was the poet Václav Havel. And Havel used a metaphor, or used a little bit of a story, if you will, to talk about what happens when societies fall apart, and specifically how quickly societies can fall apart. He said that restoring a beautiful antique chair can take generations, can take literally dozens of years. But destroying that chair can take under 2 minutes. This is how quickly societies can fall apart. And Yemen fell apart very, very quickly. And once it falls apart, it's like Humpty Dumpty that fell off the wall and breaks into a million pieces. It's very hard to put those pieces back together again, especially when the international community, and the U.S. is part of this, wants to use the country as a pawn. U.S., Russia, China, Saudi Arabia have used Yemen as a pawn in this high stakes game of chess to achieve their goals in the region. And the Yemenis are supremely tired of it. They, like everyone else, want to live a good life. They want to live a decent life. They want to live a life where they can earn money and take care of their families and live in a stable society and have some modicum of success. They're not trying to be Qatar or the UAE or Saudi Arabia. They simply want to live a life of dignity and of their version of prosperity, because we know that prosperity is not just financial prosperity. Prosperity is quality of life. Prosperity is access to education. Prosperity is good governance. And so many other things that flow into this term prosperity. And yet Yemen has almost none of these. Their country is fractured. It's like looking in a broken mirror. Instead of seeing the beauty that reflects in that mirror, all one can see are the cracks. And yet, call me ridiculous, call me a dreamer, I still have hope for Yemen. Like I said, I didn't work there long term, so I wasn't heavily invested in trying to turn the tide, if you will, in Yemen. But the projects I did there were worthwhile and they were making a difference to people. And yet, you always got the feeling that those projects, many of them at least, were treating the symptoms and not the disease. That's, by the way, that's not just the case for Yemen. There's so many countries in the world, whether it's the United States, Russia, China, the EU, JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, CETA, the Swedish International Cooperation Agency, all of these well intended counterparts, the United Nations, of course, their intentions may be good, but they're treating the symptoms and not the disease. Until Yemen has a government that can enforce governance in the country, that can put together systems that work, that can live out from under the specter of Islamic radicalism and an internal strife with the Houthis and others, there's very little hope that Yemen can achieve its full potential. It amazes me how much money and how much time is spent by organizations around the world treating symptoms while the country is dying of a disease, not a physical disease, but one that is invasive and that is put it on life support. And Yemen as a country has been on life support for a long time. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of diplomacy, a lot of conversations, but very little progress. I went to so many meetings there during my temporary duty assignments. And this is true for other countries as well, but I went to so many meetings there where all of these lofty goals were discussed. And yet you knew when you left the meeting that this is simply never going to happen. Either they were talking about symptoms or they were talking about the disease with no idea of how to fix it, how to treat it. I hold the international community somewhat responsible for the lack of traction in Yemen and countries like it, because they focus so much. And I don't denigrate those who do humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian assistance is important, and certainly Yemen and the state that it's in needs humanitarian assistance. But let's face it, let's be totally real with each other. If you have to continue to give humanitarian assistance year after year, then something's broken, something's wrong, something's not working. At some point in time, a country should be able to stand on its own, or at least with a minimum amount of help. But if you're having to feed people every year, if you're having to clothe people every year, if you're having to rebuild schools every year, if you're having to deal with crushing poverty every year, then something institutionally has gone wrong. And yet, most of these agencies, and I regret to say that USAID was one of them, most of these agencies don't address the long term. They simply provide the humanitarian assistance needed now to make sure people stay alive, very important. But at the end of the day, they move the needle forward just a tick. Yemen needs the needle moved quantumly forward. And to do that, there has to be long-term investment. There has to be long-term responsibility among those in the country, in the government, and otherwise, to put aside their agendas, to put aside their wishes of power, and to really focus on what needs to happen in the country. Will that occur? Sadly, likely not, because I am a realist. And most of the time, people don't give up power just because it's the right thing to do. They give it up because they're forced to. Economies don't get fixed through aid and donor support. They get fixed through the development of systems and good governance. And those things now are so far removed from Yemen that it's like the Mercury from Saturn or Jupiter. It just doesn't make sense. It's not happening, and likely won't happen in our lifetime, regrettably. So I don't want to end on a negative note. I hate doing that. I wish that I had the strategy or the words or the approach to say that we can fix this issue. The reality is the only people that can fix the issue are the people who are vested in not fixing it. And that's where Yemen is today. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hope it's given you something to think about. Till next time, I'm Mark McCord. This is Some Stops Along the Way. We'll see you next Monday, where we're going to pick up another country under the theme of Islam's fault line. Have a great week. See you next Monday.